This is Yellowstone, the most beautiful, violent park on Earth. We're not talking about bears, we're talking about things that hide under the steam. I'm a ranger, and these are the 3 terrifying stories they actively cover up to keep the tourists coming. Trust me, you have never heard these. Story 1, The Frozen Laughter. This happened near the northern edge of the park in January. Ranger Liam O'Connell was conducting a routine perimeter check near the Lamar Valley. It was bitter cold, brutal, actually. Liam was an experienced cold weather tracker, tough as nails. His job was just making sure the snowmobiles were secure and monitoring a remote weather station. Total isolation, nothing but vast, frozen landscape. He was logging data at the station, about 5 miles from his snowmobile, when he heard a faint sound carried by the wind, human laughter. Not a hearty laugh, but a thin, almost brittle giggle. Liam froze. Nobody was authorized in this sector, especially not in this weather. He grabbed his radio, dead static. He checked the time, 3:17 p.m. He decided it must be audio feedback or some weird ice acoustics, nothing real. He continued his patrol, but the laughter returned, clearer this time, and directly behind him. He spun around, nothing but untouched snow. Then he saw it, a small, perfect circle of green grass melted clean into the snow, about 10 feet in diameter. It was steaming slightly, impossible in the deep freeze. And sitting right in the center of the grass circle was a small, porcelain doll with wide, fixed eyes. Liam realized the temperature had dropped even further. He could barely breathe. The air felt heavy, metallic. He heard the sound again, but this time it wasn't laughter. It was a rhythmic, clicking noise, like a jaw chattering from extreme cold. He noticed the doll was now staring at him, and its tiny, painted lips were moving, silently forming words. The laughter returned, but now it sounded wet, like someone laughing with lungs full of ice water. He turned to run, but the clicking sound was all around him. He looked down and saw his boots were starting to freeze instantly to the snow. He realized the cold wasn't natural, it was focused on him. He struggled free, ripping his radio off his belt and throwing it at the steaming circle. The moment the radio landed on the green grass, it let out a sharp, digital scream, and the doll vanished. Liam didn't wait. He sprinted back toward his snowmobile, his lungs burning. As he ran, he swore he heard a chorus of small, brittle laughter fading behind him, and the last thing he saw was the steam rising violently from the spot where the doll had been, forming a perfect, rising column. Liam drove full throttle back to the main compound, half frozen. He reported a geothermal anomaly that destroyed his equipment. They found his radio 2 days later. The circuit board was completely frozen solid, but the microphone was melted. The temperature log from the abandoned weather station showed a sudden, impossible -100 degrees Fahrenheit drop exactly at 3:17 p.m., the time of the first laugh. Liam transferred out of the Rangers and now works as a mechanic in Florida. No snow for him, ever. He refuses to wear synthetic fabrics, only wool and heavy cotton. Why? Because he told me that sometimes, when he breathes out on a cool morning, he sees his breath plume. And whenever that plume of condensation freezes quickly in the air, he hears a faint, distant giggle. He knows that whatever was out there in the cold didn't hate the winter, it was the cold. Hold up, before we continue. You already know the woods are haunted, but Yellowstone is a whole different level of terrifying. If this story chilled your blood, slam that like button and subscribe to Horror Spot. And tell me this in the comments, what do you think is hiding in Yellowstone's steam? Get involved, let me know. Story 2, The Sinking Voice. This involves Ranger Carla Diaz, patrolling the Midway Geyser Basin, home of the Grand Prismatic Spring. This area is dangerously gorgeous, full of scalding water and fragile crusts. Carla's job was simple: keep tourists on the boardwalks. She was out one misty morning, just checking trail markers. The ground felt soft, totally normal for a thermal area. She was near an abandoned, small thermal pool when she heard it, a faint, desperate plea coming from the thick geothermal steam. "I can't feel the ground." Carla's training kicked in instantly. She yelled, "Stay still. Where are you?" The voice repeated the same exact words, but with a horrifying, gurgling sound underneath them. Carla thought someone had fallen through the fragile crust. She cautiously stepped toward the steam plume, using a pole to test the ground. She couldn't see anything. She yelled again. This time, the voice was louder, clearer, and utterly panicked. "It's pulling me down. It won't let go." But here's the kicker, the voice sounded exactly like her own voice, from a recording. It was her own voice, screaming for help. Carla froze. This was some straight-up psycho stuff. She checked her patrol camera's voice activation log. No recording was missing. Then she noticed the area around her. The ground wasn't just soft, it was vibrating, and the steam plume was growing taller, thicker, and coiling toward her like a snake. The voice repeated her scream one more time, but this time, it was distorted, low, and followed by a slow, sucking schluck sound. Carla knew she was standing on borrowed time. She looked down and saw a tiny trail of perfectly formed, wet human handprints leading into the small thermal pool. The prints weren't struggling, they were just walking right into the scalding water. She didn't wait for the voice to try and grab her. She turned and sprinted back down the boardwalk, leaping over the ropes. As she ran, she swore she could hear a faint, sickening gasp behind her, and then the sound of the steam plume bursting like a giant balloon. Carla made it back to the ranger station and reported severe geothermal instability. They closed the pool off immediately. The cleanup crew found nothing, no shoes, no gear, no evidence of a fall. But they did find one object, Carla's waterproof radio, which she swore she had on her hip. It was found floating perfectly on the surface of the small thermal pool, entirely undamaged. When they played back the internal recording, it was just 30 seconds of gurgling water, followed by a quiet, faint whisper, "The ground is softer here." Carla took a transfer far away from any water or steam. She lives in a dry, landlocked state now. No more geothermal for her. She told me that every time she hears running water, even a faucet, she gets a sharp, panic attack. And she refuses to ever record her own voice. Why? Because she said sometimes, when she wakes up in the middle of the night, she hears a faint, gurgling sound coming from the base of her throat, and a voice, her voice, whispering, "I can't feel the ground." Story 3, The Empty Watch. This story involves Ranger Mike "Hammer" Hansen, patrolling the vast, unpopulated backcountry of the Yellowstone caldera. Mike was a tough guy, a tank. His job was solo, deep wood survival for 5 days, marking survey points. He was in a dense, silent part of the forest, about 7,000 feet up. Mike was taking a GPS reading when his watch, a heavy, analog, totally reliable field watch, suddenly stopped ticking. Dead stop. He shook it, checked the battery, nothing. Just frozen at 4:03 p.m. He figured the cold got to it, shrugged it off. He continued his patrol, but noticed the animals were gone. No squirrels, no birds, zero noise. He reached his designated survey point, a massive, clear-cut circle in the middle of the dense forest, perhaps 100 feet across. This circle wasn't man-made, no stumps, no burn marks, just a perfect, circular clearing where nothing grew. And right in the center, he found a piece of wood carved into the shape of a crude, open eye. As he stood there, he felt a sudden, sharp pressure on his own eyes. It felt like something was pushing his eyelids open. He looked around frantically. Nothing. But when he looked at his hand, he saw the minute hand on his frozen watch had jumped backward to 4 p.m. Then forward to 4:04 p.m. It was cycling the minutes around 4 p.m., faster and faster. The pressure on his eyes intensified, He felt like his eyes were being forced to stare at the carved wooden eye in the clearing. He slammed the watch against a boulder, shattering it. The moment the glass broke, the pressure on his eyes stopped, and the air filled with a low, guttural, dragging sound coming from the tree leaned directly across the clearing. The sound wasn't moving towards him, it was moving around the perimeter of the clearing, slowly closing the circle. He saw the trees swaying slightly, but the movement wasn't caused by wind, it was caused by something invisible scraping against the bark. Mike didn't run across the clearing, he ran backward, crashing straight into the dense forest behind him. He fought through the thick brush, ignoring the pain, trying to get away from the sound and the sight of that damned clearing. Mike finally made it back to the station 2 days later. He told them he'd dropped his watch and got totally disoriented. They found the survey point a week later. Everything was normal. But the park supervisor noted that the trees lining the perimeter of the clearing were scored with deep, parallel scratch marks reaching 10 feet high, too deep to be claws. And in the center of the clearing, resting precisely where the carved eye had been, was Mike's shattered field watch. Both hands were gone, but the second hand was still cycling rapidly between 4 o'clock and 4:05. Mike took an early medical retirement. He lives far from any mountains now. Flat land for him. He told me that he refuses to wear any watches or look at clocks. Why? Because he said sometimes, when he closes his eyes at night, he sees a faint, circular clearing in the darkness, and he feels that heavy, crushing pressure on his eyelids again. He knows that thing in the clearing didn't need eyes, it just needed the time. That's the truth about Yellowstone. The beautiful landscapes are just a disguise for the absolute terror beneath. If these 3 terrifying, true ranger stories haunted you, then please do 2 things, hit that like button and subscribe to Horror Spot. And I've got 2 more videos that will truly keep you up tonight. Go watch Real Park Ranger horror stories that will haunt you and 3 Park Ranger horror stories that will keep you out of the woods. They are linked in the description and waiting for you on the end screen. Trust me, you need the whole collection.